Hi everyone, my name is Vandana Sharma and I'm your English teacher, and today we are going to do the first chapter of your book Flamingo, and ironically the name is The Last Lesson. As you can see, the chapter is written by the French novelist Alphonse Daudet. Alphonse Daudet was a French novelist and a story writer, and he was born in late 19th century in 1840. He died in 1897, and the background of this story is set up in the days of Franco-Prussian War. As you can see here, this Franco relates to France, and Prussian is that the world map was not like that it is today. In earlier days, Russia was a big continent, and it was named as Prussia, and it was a conglomeration of many countries that were together. And this chapter is based in the war of 1870 and 71. In this chapter, we shall see that France was defeated by Prussia. Prussia at that time consisted of the countries or the nations of Germany, Poland, and some parts of Austria. And Prussia was then led by Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck was the Prussian statesman and first chancellor of Germany. This is uh, Bismarck, the first Chancellor of Germany, under whose leadership was this battle being fought. And Prussia was then consisted of what now are the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. Earlier, these nations were not known by the name of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. They were parts of USSR or Prussia only. This story covers the times when French districts of Alsace and Lorraine were taken over by Prussia. ये जो दो districts हैं, Alsace and Lorraine, they are the most important names that you have to learn in this chapter, because these are these two districts which were captured by the Germans and overtaken by the Germans. और उसके बाद all the rules of Germany were imposed on French people along with their language. The language German was imposed on French people. That means that in the schools of France, no French language will be taught by the teachers. They will have to learn only German language from then onwards. People were deeply shattered by this order that were passed by the Germans, and they realized what they had lost. Earlier, they had no value of their own language, but later on, when they lost their own language, then they realized कि उन्होंने क्या खो दिया. जो बेसिक थीम है इस चैप्टर का, दैट इज लिंग्विस्टिक शॉविनिज्म. लिंग्विस्टिक मीन्स होता है रिलेटेड टू लैंग्वेज, एंड लैंग्वेज से रिलेटेड चीजों को हम लिंग्विस्टिक कहते हैं. एंड शॉविनिज्म इज टेकिंग प्राइड इन वन सेल्फ. Linguistic chauvinism means taking too much pride in one's own language. तो ये जो linguistic chauvinism है, यही इस chapter का theme है, from both the sides, France की side से भी और Germany की side से भी, क्योंकि Germans were taking too much pride in their language and they imposed their own language on the French people, and French people were taking pride in their language, but they were a little late. They only started realizing the pride that they had in their language once they lost the battle. So, beginning with the scene 1, the chapter opens up with the little Franz, who is our main character and rather narrator of the story as well. कि Franz जो है वो स्कूल जाने के लिए बहुत ज़्यादा लेट है, and he is late because उसका टेस्ट है स्कूल में. He was supposed to prepare with participles का उसका टेस्ट है स्कूल में, and Hamel ने उसका टेस्ट लेना है, and Hamel is a very strict teacher, and he is scared that Hamel would question him on participles. इस डर से वो स्कूल नहीं जाना चाहता. And rather there are too many temptations also outside the school. बहुत सारी ऐसी चीजें हैं जो उसे डिस्ट्रैक्ट करती हैं, जिनकी वजह से वो स्कूल जाने का मन नहीं होता उसका. जिनमें से कुछ हैं Prussian soldiers were drilling. Drilling means वो left right जो soldiers करते हैं ना, march past की practice, that is called drilling. So the Prussian soldiers were drilling, practicing their march past practice. और the day was also very warm and bright. बहुत अच्छा सुहाना दिन था, उसका स्कूल जाने को मन नहीं हो रहा था. And there were open fields and there was sawmill. बहुत सारी ऐसी temptations थी उसके लिए which distracted him from going to school. But even then, he resisted all these temptations. Means उसने उन सब temptations को side पे रखा and he headed off to school और वो भाग के school पहुंच गया. रास्ते में जब वो स्कूल जा रहा होता है ऑन द वे ही कम्स अक्रॉस द टाउन हॉल. अब टाउन हॉल सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट जगह है क्योंकि टाउन हॉल जो है वो एक बहुत लार्ज बुलेटिन बोर्ड है जहाँ पे all the messages, all the orders, the lost battles, all the news, they are all they all come to the people through this bulletin board only. The crowd gathered out around the bulletin board when Franz, little Franz, our main character, जो narrator भी है इस chapter का, when he was passing by the bulletin board, जब वो जा रहा था, he saw कि बहुत बड़ी भीड़ खड़ी थी bulletin board के पास. So then when he saw the crowd, he thought that this crowd might be because some of the other lost battle news or something else. But what he was about to hear, he didn't have any idea about it. He was just thinking that what could be the matter now. The bulletin board was important because it supplied all the bad news from the last 2 years since the war was going on. All the bad news they had come to know of were through this bulletin board only. The news like lost battles, the news like the drafts, news like the orders of the commanding officer, all these news reached them through this large bulletin board only. And today when Franz see that there was a big crowd around the bulletin board today also, he thought what could be the matter now? कि आज क्या हुआ होगा? There was a blacksmith watcher working with his apprentice. Apprentice means attendant, helper. And he calls on and he says to Franz that don't go so fast, Bub, you'll get to school, you're in plenty of time. बोलता अभी इतनी जल्दी क्या है जाने की, तुम आराम से स्कूल में टाइम पे पहुंच जाओगे. Franz thinks that he was making fun of him, but he was not actually making fun of him. He was speaking the truth, but this truth he would realize only once he will reach the school. अगला सीन आता है स्कूल का सीन. स्कूल का सीन बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है बिकॉज मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चंस में से एक यही आता है कि व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द यूजुअल स्कूल डेज एंड द स्कूल सीन ऑन द लास्ट डे. दोनों में क्या डिफरेंस था दैट यू हैव टू लर्न. रिमेंबर साइलेंस लाइक संडे मॉर्निंग. जनरली स्कूल में बहुत ज्यादा शोर होता था लेकिन आज it was too quiet, it was too silent, it was so silent just like as it was Sunday morning जब स्कूल में कोई होता नहीं. No usual commotion. Commotion means otherwise on the routine days there were too many children, the teacher speaking up the lesson, teaching the students, and too much of the hustle and bustle, moving of the tables and all that. But there was no movement. Nobody was there. There was no movement in the school today, and no rapping of teacher's ruler on the table. And the great teacher's great iron rule, the tap tap on the table that used to be that is rather a very regular feature of a class. It was not there today. No regular bustle means no movement or nobody was there. No opening and closing of the desks also because there was nobody in the school as it seemed like a Sunday morning. People were sitting inside but it seemed like there was nobody inside the school. Another thing that surprised Franz too much was Hamel's changed behavior. The first thing that surprised him was when he reached the school that the school was different from the usual days. When he reached inside, he saw that Franz expected that he would get inside the class amidst commotion. कि इतना शोर होगा, वो पहले से ही बहुत लेट था स्कूल के लिए, वो आराम से अंदर चला जाएगा and the teacher will never come to know of it. But when he went inside, he was surprised because the children were already at their places. मतलब बाहर से उसको लगता है कि अंदर कोई है ही नहीं है क्योंकि इतना साइलेंस था. जब वो अंदर पहुंचता है तो वो देखता है बच्चे अपनी अपनी जगह पर बैठे थे. But even then it was so silent. Hamel was roaming with his terrible ruler. The teacher was also inside the class and he was roaming around. Franz asked for permission. Franz asked to go inside the class and ask permission from the teacher. But contradictory to his expectation. Contradictory means totally opposite to his expectation. He had expected कि उसको बहुत ज़्यादा डांट पड़ेगी. But he wasn't being scolded for getting late. उसको कोई डांट नहीं पड़ी. टीचर सेड वेरी काइंडली, टीचर का बहुत काइंडली और पोलाइटली बोलना उसके लिए बहुत अजीब था, बहुत डिफरेंट था. द टीचर सेड गो टू योर प्लेस लिटिल फ्रैंस, वी वर बिगिनिंग विदाउट यू. वो कहता है कि बैठो, हम तुम्हारे बगैर ही शुरू करने वाले थे. द टू मच ऑफ द पोलाइट बिहेवियर ऑफ द टीचर ऑल्सो surprised him a lot. Then another thing that surprised our Franz was the dress of the teacher. And Hamel dressed very differently. He was generally in his routine clothes, but today he was wearing his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, his little black silk cap, all embroidered. And it was surprising because he wore this dress usually on prize days or on inspection days. जब कोई स्कूल में फंक्शन होता था या कोई इंस्पेक्शन होती थी, वो तभी ये ड्रेस पहनता था. अदरवाइज he was in his normal clothes. So Franz was thinking, why was he wearing this special dress today that he wore only on inspection days or prize days? Another thing that he was surprised at was that the back benches of the class, which generally were emptied, were occupied by people today. Generally, class में people, there were no people in the class. It was generally vacant, but today it was all occupied. He saw that there were village people sitting on the last benches. So why village people were sitting on the last benches? That was also a thing that surprised him. People were sitting quietly like students, and the villagers were all sitting quiet, just like they were students. Who all people were sitting in the class? There was old Hauser in his three-cornered hat. There was an old man whose name was Hauser. The former mayor of the village, the former postmaster, and many other people were sitting inside the classroom. But the thing was not that they were sitting there, but the surprising thing was that they all were looking very sad. They had brought their old primers. Primers means the primary books. They had brought their books along with them, the primary books. Elderly people of the village were sitting in the school at the back benches who were not there generally in the class, and they were also holding primary class books. Then M. Hamel made an announcement. In his grave and gentle tone, he announced, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French class. I want you to be very, very attentive." His words were a thunderclap to Franz. Thunderclap to Franz means उसके कानों पर ये words बिजली की तरह गिरे, means he was under a great shock of his life कि ये टीचर ने क्या बोल दिया. Last lesson, German language, no French language anymore. Last French class. This gave him a tremendous and huge shock, and he was very much sad and stunned at this. Once Franz learns about the decision the Germans had, the orders that Germans had imposed on the French people, he regretted for not learning. These are his thoughts that he was thinking at that time. He thought कि my books that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, जो उसे थोड़ी देर पहले इतना बड़ा झंझट लगती थी, मुसीबत लगती थी, so heavy to carry, my grammar, my history of the saints, they were old friends now that I couldn't give up. Give up means उन्हें छोड़ नहीं पा रहा है. And Hamel too, not only that he had to give up his language and his books, but also that his teacher was also leaving. He will not be able to see him anymore. M. Hamel too, the idea that he was going away, that he should never see him again, and made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. जैसे ही उसे ये realize होता है that his teacher was leaving and he will never be able to see him again, जैसे उसे ये realize हुआ, उसके साथ ही forgot everything about his ruler, that he was so strict, कितना उसकी छड़ी से उसने उसको मारा या और बच्चों को वो मारता था, and how cranky he was. Cranky means that how fussy he was crazy, and now his ideas about his teachers suddenly changed in a fraction of a second when he came to know that his teacher was also leaving. So his teacher was leaving, that was not acceptable to him. He thought like that he won't be able to read, he would have to leave his books. He will have to regret this decision that he had not learnt his language any more. Suddenly in his heart, his love for his lost nation comes up, springs up, and now he realizes that it was in the honor of his last lesson that he had put on his Sunday clothes. Now Franz realizes, अब उसे realize होता है कि why the teacher was wearing those special clothes. Now he understands कि why the old people from village had gathered, as they were sorry that they had neglected school and they had come to pay respect to the old master for his 40 years of faithful service, showing respect to their country that was theirs no more. So this was the reason that the old villagers had gathered in the school. Number one was that they were feeling sorry that they had ignored the school, they had not given any importance to their language. Number two, that they had come there to pay respect to their old master for his 40 years of faithful service. And number three, to show respect to their country that was theirs no more. वो देश जो अब उनका नहीं रहा. Now M. Hamel starts questions everyone on the participles. जो टेस्ट था वो टीचर को लेना ही था. Though it was the last day of his service, he could have easily skipped the test, but he was a very dedicated teacher, very devoted to his task. So the test that he had given to the children, he had to take it. Franz thought that he would speak confidently. Franz thought and he wished that for once that he wants his teacher to be proud of him. For once he wants to speak all the rules of the participles fluently without any breakup, without any fumbling, without any mistake. But Franz got mixed up on the very first words. शुरू में ही जैसे उसने बोलना स्टार्ट किया, उसने सब भूल गया था उसको क्योंकि आता ही नहीं था कुछ भी. So he was fumbling and he was sorry for not being able to speak and he could not face M. Hamel, his teacher, anymore. That's when the teacher blames them for neglect of learning. He says people of Alsace who kept learning for tomorrow, उनको blame करता है. He blamed the parents, those who preferred to put their children on fields rather than sending them to school. And then he blames himself also for not taking his classes seriously. He blames himself for sending his students to water his plants and giving holidays when he wished to go for fishing. Whenever he did not want to teach them, he just wanted to take a holiday and he sent the children. Then M. Hamel praises French language a lot. He praises it in all the most beautiful words and he calls French the most beautiful language in the world. He calls it the clearest and the most logical language ever. He said that we must guard it among us and never forget it. When a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to his language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. That if the people have trust in their own culture, in their own language, in their own traditions, they will definitely try to save it. And this way, they can save themselves from their slavery also. They can save themselves from their prison also. Franz was filled with admiration for M. Hamel on the last day. On the last day, M. Hamel taught with patience. He feels like he thinks that I had never listened so carefully and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. ना सिर्फ उसको खुद में चेंज नजर आता है बल्कि उसको टीचर में भी चेंज फील होता है that his teacher had never taught him with so patience और शायद उसने कभी ऐसे इतने ध्यान से सुना ही नहीं. शायद उसे अगर सुना होता तो वो रूल्स उसे लर्न होते. M. Hamel wanted to teach everything in one class. जितना नॉलेज टीचर को था उसे लगता है कि आज एक ही क्लास रह गई है. This is the last lesson today, जो हमारे चैप्टर का टाइटल भी है. I hope now you understand why the chapter has been named the last lesson. So because in this last lesson, the knowledge that the teacher had, he wanted to give all his knowledge to his students in one stroke. Franz thinks that it seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. एक ही बार में टीचर चाहता था कि जितनी नॉलेज उसको है, जितना उसे जानता है, उतना जितना उसे आता है वो सारा अपने बच्चों को एक ही बार में सिखा दे. Then M. Hamel had brought new copies for all his students to give it all a new start. On copies, everyone had to practice handwriting, and it was written in beautiful round hand. Cursive writing में उसने writing के लिए example के लिए ये words लिखे थे. France essays, France and essays. This also shows his patriotism, his love for his nation. It looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desk. तो वो जो words थे, उनकी जो बनावट भी थी और उनके पीछे जो feeling भी थी, उससे ऐसा लग रहा था that they were all little flags. Everyone set to work. Everything was quiet. Only sound heard was the scratching of pen over the paper. Will they make them sing in German, even the pigeon? This is a satirical remark upon Germans made by Franz. Franz mocks Germans that can they force animal and birds too to speak in German? That means that human beings can be forced to change their language, but birds were free. They cannot force the birds to speak their language. Franz was pitying the state and the condition of French people, that where they, being humans, were forced to change their language, but the birds, they were still free to converse in their language only. Man has turned inhuman, where he wants to control, rule and take over others. But birds and animals are better, who still let each other live free in their own peripheries. This is what this statement means, that will they make them sing in German too, the pigeons? M. Hamel feels sorry for the loss of his country. He felt sorry for the lost freedom and his country. He felt sorry that he had to leave. He wanted to fix everything in a gaze. Fix everything in a gaze means he was staring at each and everything in the class, in the school, as he wanted to fix that image in his mind forever. He had served the school for past 40 years, and he had planted trees and plants in the garden, which were very tall today. M. Hamel was ready to leave. His sister was moving in the room above the classroom, packing trunks, for they must leave the country the next day. M. Hamel stood up very pale. I never saw him look so tall. Look so tall means he stood up very confidently. Franz ने इतना confidence अपने teacher में आज तक नहीं देखा था. Only that the teacher was trying to put up a face of being confident, but in his heart he was shattered into pieces. M. Hamel could not face the people and his students. Something choked him from speaking, so he turns to the board and writes as large as he could, "Vive la France." That means long live France. He was so overcome with emotions. उसके emotions उस पर इतने हावी हो जाते हैं. He was so overcome with them that he was not able to speak. वो बोलना चाहता है लेकिन उसके गले से आवाज निकलती ही नहीं. So to express his emotions, he wrote on the blackboard as large as he could, "Vive la France," जिसका मतलब होता है long live France. Now few things that you have to ponder upon is कि mother tongue, language and linguistic chauvinism, इन तीनों में फर्क क्या है? Do we take too much of the pride in our mother tongue? Language and linguistic chauvinism में क्या फर्क है? Why first person narrative technique is used? Because as you must have read that the chapter is totally narrated by Franz in first person. Why Franz, a little boy, as narrator, and why not M. Hamel? ऐसा क्यों? ऐसा आप इसलिए सोच सकते हैं. We can say that because M. Hamel was overcome with emotions. He was not able to speak. There is not even a single thought of M. Hamel described in the chapter. Linguistic chauvinism is the major theme, or the patriotism is the major theme. Who is the main protagonist? Is it M. Hamel or is it Franz? Thank you for watching the video. I hope you understood the chapter.